Ever since I played Bioshock Infinite, I wanted to play the other games in the series. I thought I had them all, but in the end I only had the second one. I'm one of those players who thinks that the second game in a franchise is almost always the best one. But obviously there are some exceptions that break that rule, and Bioshock 2 seems one of those. Since you are here, why don't you like, share or subscribe to the channel? From time to time I just release content like this one. It's a massive help. Thank you very much. I'm completely ignorant when it comes to the video games that came out between 2000 and 2014 more or less. And there is the vast majority of games that today are considered classics. I'm gradually dedicating myself to closing that gap and understanding what people say about them. Bioshock 2, despite being a 15-year-old game, felt overrated when I played it. The constant mention of events that had taken place in the previous game led me to believe that I was missing the point. So I've asked Mr. Google what had happened there so I could compare. And that only reinforced my first impressions. In Bioshock, Andrew Ryan creates Rapture, a city built at the bottom of the ocean. A city that was intended to be a secret utopia for the elites, a place where the elites could persevere without anyone's interference. In a game marked by a political message, made at a time when the players were not as whiny as they are now, there was a criticism of objectivism, of the cult of the self. With multiple possible endings based on our decisions, what was common was the apparent distraction of Rapture's utopic ideology. Let's forget about the depth and the message of the first game's storyline for a while, as I can only take the key points and extrapolate from them, and limit ourselves to Bioshock 2. The introduction of the game has the sole purpose of contextualize us. We are a big daddy now, a human genetically modified to become stronger. Added to that, we are inside the diving suit, and that allows us to walk underwater. Our primary function is to protect the little sisters, children genetically modified to be able to remove Adam, the drug capable of genetically alter people, giving them superhuman powers. They extract it from corpses and transforming it on their stomachs. This is the first attempt to explain our bond with Eleanor, the little sister that we adopted and protected. Then we suddenly realize that we are being controlled by Sophia Lamb, who at the time we don't really know who she is, only that she is Eleanor'S mother, and apparently without being able to fight her order, we commit suicide. In the next scene, we are reborn. We are not quite sure how, and we realize that Eleanor is able to mentally contact us. How does Eleanor manage to do this? Well, apparently by the divine will of the Holy Spirit. This apparent lack of justification for events is a constant throughout the narrative, leaving some holes that, while not preventing the progress of the story, prevent the game from entering my icon standards. And I can give some other examples. Eleanor manages to control the little sisters. How? Well, nobody knows, not even Eleanor. It was just convenient for a story that seems to have been written from the end to the beginning. A new character appearing in this game are the Big Sisters, who are supposed to protect the Little Sisters. So far so good. Considering the importance of the Little Sisters to the society in which they are inserted, introducing diversity and complexity in the way of protecting them is important. But one of the game mechanics involves our interaction with them. We can choose to save them, the Little Sisters, and gain, or not to save them, and gain a lot more resources with it. The intervention of the Big Sisters would have some logic if our option was not to save the Little Sisters. However, it is exactly in the opposite situation that the possibility of them appearing is generated, creating moments of unfair difficulty, poorly explained since, in practice, they rise when we are already in very low health and ammo, after defeating several waves of enemies at situations when we are even helping them. Rapture is also a pretty wrecked underwater city, so wrecked that it's barely noticeable how it's still not completely taken over by water. Leaks appear everywhere, some larger than others, in other places in large numbers, and the number of holes is such that I don't even know if the black duct tape itself would be enough to save it. It's easier to characterize a post-apocalyptic world on the surface. The task seems much less complex than under the sea. I have, of course, to recognize that. But when we aim for a total immersion experience, pun not intended, all the small details contribute to generate noise. The story that I think is told outside the game. Well, it's not easy to tell a story in a video game. Each player responds differently to the same stimulus. Different players, when faced with a decision, choose alternative paths, and even a linear story is often experienced differently by each person, depending on the intrinsic influence of the biopsychological situation of each one. Bioshock 2 tries to juggle with a linear story and the ability to decide, but the way they ground the experience didn't allow it to get the most of it. The first game was based on the exploration of the flaws of objectivism, a philosophical theory that focuses on the cult of the self, seeing the moral objective of life as the achievement of personal happiness, only respecting the principle of freedom, property, and happiness of the other. Politically, this can be interpreted as an arm of capitalism in its purest and most unregulated form. From what I understand, the first game became iconographic in explaining its flaws. To build Rapture, workers had to be hired, but after the work was done, they became a problem, as they could not return to the surface, so as not to expose the secret location of the city, nor did they have a place in the capitalist utopia of the elites that was trying to be reproduced. By remaining in the city, they became a focus of tension, instability, and exploitation, which, when the sheep proliferation of Adam made them addicted, they were easily manipulated and capable of starting a revolution. In that game, we are able to objectively perceive the good things about the idea and its flaws. Narratively, even without having played the game, it seems to me that it's a very simple concept, practical and effective. Bioshock 2 doesn't have the same simplicity, nor is it able to convey its asymmetry to us, so I've never been able to feel real empathy with anyone. In one way or another, they were all portrayed as bad people. This game is used as an antithesis of the first one. In this game, the problems of extreme altruism, religious cults, and collectivist ideals are explored. On paper, it's an excellent idea, and in a way, it's the obvious conclusion of the attack on extreme ideologies. But while the first game is able to show the best of what an ideology has to offer, in the second we have to infer what will happen from the information they give us. Sophia Lamb, the villain of the story, tries to make from Eleanor Lamb, with permanent Adam administration, the first fully altruistic person. This is mentioned several times during the game, and there are some multiple posters on the walls alluding to this fact, but it is never explained what is intended with this deification. What difference would a saint-like being make to Rapture? To what extent would it change people's misery and addiction? What is the direct implication on their quality of life? In practice, we do not know. We never know. During the game, we can only see misery, and there is not even a glimpse of what Rapture could become. So there is no dyad for us to struggle with. From the beginning, collectivist ideals failed, or rather, had no chance. Our quest is based on the bond that is never perfectly explained with Eleanor. Based on that, and imagining that we have a fatherly love for her, the decisions the game makes us take aren't really decisions. In addition to being able to choose to save or kill the little sisters, there are also 3 NPCs that we have to make choices about. In the first part of the game, the information is given to us in a neutral way by a neutral character, so we can perfectly decide for ourselves what to do with the first NPC we meet, as well as with what to do with the little sisters. From there on, it's Eleanor taking advantage of our bond, who gives us almost all information about the new characters. There is a clear asymmetry of points of view at this point. Without each NPC having much opportunity to defend itself beyond some dialogues that are not always able to even antagonize Eleanor's point of view. Often, information relevant to the character's fate only appears in voice recordings whose hearing is completely optional, and there is even no guarantee that we will find them. In other words, 2 characters have their destiny traced from the start. Our option is real, of course it is, but illusory in the sense that a parent will always believe and defend their child, especially if you are not given any information capable of counterbalancing their world. Of course, in 2022, we already know these mind tricks and we know that we are being manipulated, but I've decided to play along. The devs themselves realize this as a flaw, as the good ending of this game is flexible enough to allow us to kill those 2 characters, even though Eleanor's final dialogue indicates that we didn't. It's very convenient. As a rule of thumb, I don't really like it when the story is narrated to us along the way, because it indicates that we wouldn't be able to understand anything if it didn't happen. In Bioshock 2, the visual context serves as a crutch for the narration. A narration that we also don't know how we have access to, since everyone seems to be able to speak directly into our brain, as if we were a radio antenna. At all times, we feel oblivious to what is happening. We do not belong to the world. We are there temporarily, although our genesis is intrinsically linked to it. Games like Spec Ops: The Line, despite being completely linear, forces us to feel the consequences of our decisions, often in immediate changes in the behavior and reactions of our companions. In Bioshock 2, I didn't feel any real weight in my decisions in decision making. Okay, now you get shot in the head and let's move on. Nothing followed. When I've saved the first NPC, there was still 1 or 2 messages he sent me, and I think I've won some items, but none of that interfered with the game itself. I thought that later he would help me in some sort of confrontation, but no, nothing. Speaking about confrontation, a final confrontation is clearly missing in the game. The game ends in an anticlimactic way. If in the first game there is a remarkable ending with the little sisters helping Jack to kill Fontaine when all seemed lost, after his meeting with Andrew, there is no such emblematic moment here. In fact, now that I've finished playing, I can't find any moment that has marked me. None. Nor any strong message to report to you. The use of Sophia as an integral part of the final cinematic, and there being no strong character besides her, creates this void in which I didn't feel properly fulfilled at the end of the game. So much so that I even thought that could be some plot twist. But even in that, the game is linear and does not present us with any surprises. The biggest surprise I had, or rather, the biggest doubt I was left with, was whether our character really had parental love for Eleanor, or if there was a psychological need for him to just stay alive, given Eleanor's speech at one point. I wonder if there is any intention to create this doubt, or if it is just the figurative resource of this type of speech to highlight Eleanor's actions. Once again, they have no impact on the course of the game at any point, so it's just another moment there that I think it could be very way better explained. So, are we saved by gameplay? Our in-game character is imposing, as well as his peers. We are a big daddy. Each of the big daddies has a very important role for Rapture's survival, protecting the little sisters. That alone explains, and very well, that they are clearly far more powerful than anyone else. During the game, we face many other big daddies. Sometimes we find them in the middle of a skirmish with other people and they just finish them off very easily. This is exactly what should happen, but our character seems underpowered in this chapter. I imagine that to compensate for this clear difference in power between characters, the game's gunplay is unsatisfactory. What I mean by this is that, in this case, it appears that the damage we inflict on others is far less than what we suffer from the same weapon. Of course, a balance of power had to be created. That's out of the question, but it's still poorly explained and throws some more sand into our immersion. Apart from that, the use of plasmids is excellent. It's fantastic. The great diversity we have to approach situations is impressive. That's really the key feature of combat in this game. The way we experiment with approaching enemies is a lot of fun, and it never disappoints. We can electrocute them, set them on fire, throw a swarm of bees at them, trick them into a decoy, call robots to fight with us, we can freeze them, we can pick up objects with our mind and throw them, or we can even put traps that throw enemies into the air. I'm so used to this diversity being only theoretical, since in practice it ends up leading to a style of play with little diversity, that I was genuinely delighted with such real diversity. At one point I found my most efficient fighting style, but it was so much more fun to spend a little bit of time planning and finding different ways to approach that problems that I just did that most of the times. Another thing that makes this fighting design memorable is that the game doesn't force us to do this. To tell the truth, 2 or 3 of these options are enough to carry us throughout the game, which makes the real need for Adam a mere illusion, since in practice we need much less than what the game makes us believe. I rarely look for the accessory within a game. Most of the time it's the opposite. I choose to ignore what I do not need to do, but Bioshock 2 is one of the few games I really wanted to unlock and use all these options. All the options combined make this game one of the most fun I've ever played. So, in a nutshell, on Metacritic, Bioshock for PC appears with a score of 96, Bioshock 2 with 88. Although it seems that I leave a lot of criticism of the game, I believe that nowadays a game like Bioshock 2, keeping the story and gameplay but taking a total graphic remake, the remaster, which was the version I've played, still makes the game smell like old. Would certainly be well into the 90s. It's now much easier to give a high grade than it was before, and the scale was also shift closer to the top of the chart. Even so, and trying to translate this difference, it seems to me that the first game was more innovative and had more impact on the players. Something that just by the story and scenes I went and see seems quite likely. Another reason is that it's much easier to compensate for a difference of 8 points from 60 to 68 or from 70 to 78 than from 88 to 96. It seems clear to me that whoever made the game knew that its design created new limits and that it was very difficult to create an antagonistic story from the first and still create the same feeling in the player without the novelty factor. The investment needed to improve the game meaningfully seems enormous to me. Most of the things I mentioned are not relevant. Changing something means that they had to change the whole game or the whole story to improve a virtual ranking that does not always represent the specific value that a game can have for each player. In its way and in its time, Bioshock 2 remains an excellent game, which, if it were released completely in isolation from the first, as Bioshock Infinite was, it probably wouldn't have to go through these constant comparisons with a game that has become a reference for countless players, perhaps for an entire generation. This reason makes it hardly ever to be considered a cult game, and believe me, even today it seems to be able to beat a lot of AAAs out there. This video, with an enumeration of points that I considered essentially negative, is a perfect example that a game can have problems and still be a masterpiece. Its quality is unquestionable, because in the fluidity of the game, these issues go perfectly unnoticed, or many players may not even find them relevant or even care about them. I don't blame them. In the midst of such a fun combat, it's not difficult to do so. See you next time, guys. Bye!